over my time watching football, very rarely do I see a fan base give up so quickly on a player as with Zach Wilson. Let's be honest here, okay? Let's everybody, let's be honest with ourselves and what we watched the Jets do against the Jaguars, which offensively was jack shit. You had Zach Wilson, who was sacked multiple times, who was under pressure on pretty much every single throw that he had. I tallied it down. I tallied I went back and I watched every single missed throw. Every last one of them. His first one, throw away under pressure. Second one, which was the only one of the ones that I saw, besides besides the fifth one where he gets knocked down by the defender. He didn't quite hit Davis fully in stride on the route. He hit him like just behind the route. Third one, thrown away under pressure. Second one, takes a hit and didn't hit Davis in stride. Still under pressure. Fifth, gets hit. There's no chip block on the screen. They run a screen pass on like 2nd and 18. It doesn't work. Guy swats it down. Dude, Jets fans booing him in the day, or trying to boo him out of the stadium, basically. Sixth one, under pressure, hits the ball or shoots the ball over the receiver, is trying to like kind of get it away more or less. And then seventh play, he tries to make a play with the ball and it just gets swatted. He escapes pressure on that throw. Almost every single throw that Zach Wilson threw yesterday was under pressure, which is no surprise when you look at their injury chart. Cedric Odegi, I hope I pronounced that name right. Often their offensive tackle, he's on IR. Vera Tucker, their guard, he's on IR. Brees Hall, who is their best running back on the roster, he's on IR. Becton, he's on IR. Sanat, he's been out for since July. All these offensive line pieces have been out. And the ones that they have left that are actually like in the roster that are actually playing are they're not good. Dwayne Brown and George Fant aren't great. Tomlinson isn't playing great. The only person on this offensive line that I would even really trust would be Tardif, because he was really good when he played for the Chiefs, but he's not the starter there. He's not considered the starter. So you got a heavily injured team, a heavily injured offense. Looking here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different players on the Jets offense are injured. Just their offense are injured. And you have a bunch of defensive pieces: CJ Mosley, Carl Lawson, Quincy Williams. They're just not performing. Now, addressing the elephant in the room is this quarterback circus that has been happening over the course of this entire like month-long stretch. Ever since the Pats game, it's been this sort of slog trying to figure out what is the true issue here. Is it Zach Wilson? Is it the offense? Is the defense not holding up their end of the bargain? What is going on? And I've covered every last one. And so here is the definitive takes on the four quarterbacks that are on their roster, starting with Mike White, ending with Chris Streveler. Streveler. Mike White, he looks on paper, he looks good, and it looks like he has the most support from the overall fan base. However, when you actually dig into the stats and you look at some of his throws, he makes Zach Wilson S throws where he just throws it into the ground, or he throws it directly at the defenders, and the defenders either almost pick him off or they do pick him off, which is how they lost the Vikings game. I've talked about it multiple times. The Jets did not lose the Vikings game solely because the defense let up 27 points. They lost the Vikings game because when it came down to it, Mike White in the clutch, final 4 plays of the game, he couldn't make anything happen. And he almost got picked on second down, and he got picked on fourth down, and they lost the game. That is the fact of that game. And then he goes out, he plays against the Bills. They lose against the Bills. He's stepping into the defenders, which leads to his ribs getting cracked. So you have a poor offensive line and a guy who's getting beat the hell up behind said offensive line. All the while, he's averaging the same yards per attempt as Zach Wilson is, which you immediately think that cannot be possible. But then you actually look at the stats. Zach Wilson, as of this past game, he went in averaging 7.1. Now he's averaging after that game 7.0 yards per attempt. Off 242 attempts, he has averaged 7 yards per attempt. You scroll over to Mike White this season. Mike White, 129 attempts, 7.4. A point 0.4 yardage difference is the only thing that separates these two quarterbacks. And most of that difference comes from the Chicago game, which is really what Mike White has been coasting off of since he started this season. Because he wasn't really that great last season. He came in this season, beat up on a Chicago team that didn't have Justin Fields and has also dealt with just a myriad of injuries, beats them up, and then gets beat up by the Vikings, and then gets his ribs crushed by the Buffalo Bills. And so you had Zach Wilson, who's our next player, who, when you actually look at him, statistically speaking, he has improved at every single point in his game. He's fumbled the ball less, he's taken less sacks, he has a higher passer rating, he has more yards per game, even though he has less attempts per game. The only thing that really hasn't changed is his percentage passing, is his completion percentage, which a lot of that does not come directly from Zach Wilson just missing players. If you remember back here, he threw 18 passes yesterday. He completed 9 of those passes. Of the 9 that he missed, about 5 of those were because he was throwing them away to avoid sacks. So, I've said it multiple times that this offense is terrible. And it lets Wilson down. It lets every quarterback on that roster down. Because they can't run it, and the offensive line is terrible. They can't pass it because you get 2 seconds to throw. I've seen real live people actually go in and look at that first sack that Zach Wilson took, where the right guard and the right tackle, neither of them block their assignment, block the blitz assignment. Neither of them even move in that direction. And they say, oh, well, Zach Wilson should have just, slid to the left like 2 steps and should have known that the blitzer was coming. It was cover 1. He should have read that defense. Or he should have thrown the ball. There is nowhere to throw the ball to before he got hit. And it's coming from the opposite side where none of his players are. He does not have a throw on the right side. So he looks to the left side and he gets fucking slammed. It's not good. He's improved statistically, but Jets fans as a whole ignore that and ignore the fact that he still has a winning record even after losing two games, one of which, the game against the Lions, was not his fault. He cannot play defense and he cannot play special teams. Those two things are out of Zach Wilson's control, and those two things are what cost them that game. Zach Wilson threw a 40-yard touchdown and led a touchdown drive to take the lead. I don't know what else you want from your developing quarterback. Sorry he's not Patrick Mahomes out the gate. Patrick Mahomes had a much better supporting cast in year two, and he got to develop behind Alex Smith with the coaching of Andy Reid and Matt Nagy, who Matt Nagy, before he's not the greatest head coach, but he's developed some fairly solid quarterbacks. Has a fairly good eye for quarterback talent. So with all these factors in mind, we go on to QB3 that is on the roster, who is Joe Flacco, who in no regard has played good. You can't make the argument that Joe Flacco's played good. He had a good second half in which they made a comeback, and then nothing. Literally nothing from Joe Flacco. He otherwise is just a terrible quarterback at this stage of his career, which is fine. He's 37. He's not supposed to be the franchise guy at this stage. So then that leaves us with what we saw yesterday. Chris Streveler. Which Chris Streveler, I've said it a couple times, is Tim Tebow. Is Tim Tebow, but he played in the CFL beforehand. That is Chris Streveler. Even in the CFL, that was Chris Streveler. Chris Streveler in the CFL was 8 for 12 when it came to passing touchdown interception ratio in the CFL. He was not exactly the number one guy when it came to overall stats, but he was a great runner. He ran for over 700 yards and got 12 scores on the ground. Like I said, Tim Tebow numbers. And so now, because they benched Zach Wilson, and because Chris Streveler, they ran a crap load of read option plays. They ran multiple read option plays, and then when he had to actually throw the ball, if he threw it more than 3 yards, it looked like he was lobbing. It literally looked like his 3+ yard passes looked like Zach Wilson's 40-yard passes, which is not a great sign. So they don't have a quarterback on the roster right now that can win with the level of production that is around them, with the level of play that the defense gives them, that the special teams give them, that the running game gives them. None of these quarterbacks are going to be able to overcome that. And so we're going into these final 2 weeks, and the Jets have a decision to make. Either Mike White gets cleared, he plays, and he either gets dumpstered these next 2 weeks, and the Jets miss the playoffs again, or he wins these next 2 weeks. He beats the Seahawks, and he beats the Dolphins. Which, the Dolphins are another team that Zach Wilson beat and actually looked decent when he beat them. So maybe Mike White comes in and he looks great. But there's an equal opportunity chance that he goes out and he looks awful. And then you have Zach Wilson, who, despite improving at every statistical level, does not get any breaks because of his draft status. Because he's the number 2 overall pick, he has such a high expectation placed upon him that, frankly, unless he magically turned into Patrick Mahomes at this stage, people are just going to say he's Jamarcus Russell a bust. Jamarcus Russell Ryan Leaf. Which most of this is coming from a month ago when he said that he didn't let the defense down when, it was special teams that really let the fucking team down, giving up a punt return touchdown. But let's be real with ourselves. Zach Wilson is not a Ryan Leaf. He's gone out and he's literally gone out these past 2 weeks and been like, I need to play better, I need to get better. This is on me, not on the defense. Even though, again, he did that with with the Lions game, the defense and the special teams cost them that game. That's besides the point. And he didn't go out on this game and go, oh well, the O line has just been as fucking wide open as a $2 hooker. He didn't do that. He could have done that. He could have been like, oh well, the O line is playing like shit, and we can't run the football, and so yeah, when you put me out in the rain in these conditions with this team, yeah, it's gonna look like shit. So none of these quarterbacks are going to go anywhere anytime soon with the way that this team is playing and with the way that this team is built. And that's just the fact. That's just the sad reality. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have this issue. In a perfect world, there would be no problem. And Zach Wilson would be given the time to at least attempt. The Jets could at least attempt to try and develop him any, instead of expecting him to be immediately great. Instead of putting the immediate weight of the franchise behind a terrible O-line and running game. Ever since all of their O-line got injured and their best running back that they've had in a decade got hurt. Which, you can't fault Zach Wilson for that. You can't fault Zach Wilson for the play of his team. Now, all of this is not to say that Zach Wilson is great, that he's perfect. Because Zach Wilson is frankly not perfect. That's the beauty of Zach Wilson. He's not perfect, and he has room to grow. But there is not a single fucking person who will both criticize Mike White's poor play, or any of these other quarterbacks' poor player flaws, that will also give that benefit of the doubt to Zach Wilson. So now, what are we left with? We're left with a guy who is in a comparison situation comparable to a guy like Josh Allen or Tua in terms of, oh, by year 2 he's not an immediate superstar, we're not like immediately in the Super Bowl contention race. Must be something up with the guy, must be something up with the quarterback. Can't possibly be any of the players around him that are bad. And then because of that, we are then comparing him to other number 2 overall picks, in this case, Jamarcus Russell and Ryan Leaf. But I think actually Jamarcus was the number 1. I don't really care. Comparing him to those guys as if he is that much of a cancer to the organization, or that much of a bust. Because Ryan Leaf and Jamarcus Russell both were terrible and didn't win games. Zach Wilson is just mediocre and wins games but also loses games. He does both. And most of the mediocrity comes from the fact, like I've said before, that he had averaged 21 attempts per game before these past 2 weeks. Or really last week. Last week he had the most attempts that he had pretty much all season and looked fairly solid. But At the end of the day, Jets fans just don't want Zach Wilson. They want somebody who's not Zach Wilson, even in the face of the fact that the rest of their team sucks and no other quarterback has the upside that Zach Wilson has, or will get the results that Zach Wilson has attempted to get. They'll just make the excuses as to why he's bad, whether that be oh he came from BYU, he's white rich kid, or oh he's too busy fucking his mom's friend or whatever. They'll make these excuses, and they just will refuse to acknowledge anything else other than Zach Wilson is bad, and then play blind man when they see any of the other quarterbacks play like shit or have any flaws to them. So, if you're a Chiefs or if you're a Jets fan, of which I am not from NY, I don't have any connections to New York. If you're a Jets fan, your hope and your prayer should be that Zach Wilson improves. Because odds are any free agent quarterback that thinks about coming to the Jets will probably fail, to be honest, if the Jets don't improve their team. Especially if they don't improve their play calling. I didn't even get into Matt LaFleur and how throwing a screen on a 2nd and 18 is a terrible fucking play call. But that's just me sipping on my freaking juicy juice over here. Like, it's ridiculous. So that's been the end of this Foxcast, and I don't know, it's tiring dealing with the Zach Wilson, Mike White, fucking QB carousel that is the New York Jets. Because even when the Jets have what they want, they don't have what they want. It's, I don't know. They want Mahomes, but when they have to settle for Philip Rivers, they're like, "Fuck this! I hate life. Let's axe him before he can even attempt to even get anywhere." It's a frustrating cycle if you're a Jets fan, which you can't acknowledge. If you can't acknowledge any of the other QB's faults, then I don't know how you can possibly acknowledge Zach Wilson's. It's ridiculous.